Before we get started today, I would just like to invite you to support this podcast at patreon.com/H2BNA. I've mentioned this before, but I really don't do this podcast for money. There's not really any chance. There's a chance, but it's a long shot that this will ever be like financially productive. So this is something that I kind of fit in between my work and I fit in between family. So that definitely is like a tension, and there are more bigger priorities than this. Making a living and taking care of a family and being with family are bigger priorities. And so any financial support I can get towards producing this podcast, it just allows me to offload some of the work that I'm doing to make the podcast happen. So if I can hire someone to, for example, edit audio, not only will the production quality of this podcast increase, but it also creates a little bit less of a tension with the other stuff I got to do to make a living and live a life. So it increases the chance of this project being sustainable. It also, the other thing that's going to happen with those funds is those funds can go towards just making this podcast sound better and look better insofar that it involves any video. So just so happens that there is a $13 tier on Patreon that no one has signed up for yet. If you'd like to sign up for that, you get a shout out, but you also get a 10% discount on everything at my store. And one of the best ways you could choose to use that discount is by ordering a commission. A commission is a custom piece of artwork where I draw the subject matter of your choosing. You can look at that at brandondayton.com. And you can find commissions there. It's been a long time since I've had a chance to do a fun commission. I absolutely love doing commissions. I really try hard to make something that's going to be awesome for for whoever's ordering the commission. It's something I would love to do for a supporter of this podcast. So if that's of interest to you, you want to get a discount on a great commission, consider supporting the podcast at the $13 level. But honestly, support at any level is greatly appreciated. So if you're liking this podcast, please consider doing so. If you happen to listen to this podcast on a platform like iTunes, I would also greatly appreciate any reviews, any ratings. That also helps to get this podcast discovered by more people and, hopefully get some support that way too. So with that being said, I hope you enjoy today's episode. How to be an artist. Step 8. Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? Part 2. Featuring Cameron Dayton. Anyway, I wanted to I was thinking a little bit more about what I was asking you about last time or interested in about last time. And I kind of formulated, I think, a little bit better way to say it, because I think a lot of people that are going to be listening to this podcast are people that are interested in being in some sort of creative field and making art. And so kind of one of the things I'm showing with this podcast is kind of like all the different ways people get to where they are, but also the different things they have to balance. So what I think has been interesting in your case is you've had kind of these two things that you've wanted to accomplish with your work. And one is that you have, your children that are in Arizona. And then you have like your ambitions, which are not insubstantial. So I guess I'm interested in how you've worked through trying to balance out those two things.
Well, it hasn't been easy. That's for sure.
Yeah.
And one of the costs of that has been, not really having a solid home base for a really, large portion of my professional life. The unfortunate fact that my ex and kids ended up in Arizona, a state which is almost as devoid of gaming business and culture as it is of moisture, has meant that I end up, working in LA or San Francisco, Austin, Seattle, these places that are more hubs to my industry. And then, having to travel back and do the every other weekend here in my place in Arizona. And so, there was initially a little bit of kind of this, Batman Bruce Wayne kind of rush about that, about what that was like. And I had my professional life, in LA, and I had a little, little professional studio there. And then here I would, shift into the dad mode. But that kind of disharmony between those two lifestyles really, takes an effect on you. And so that's why I've, become more focused over these past 2 years in shifting everything to here. The nice thing is my career is now...
You're in Arizona now.
Yeah, sorry. I'm in Scottsdale right now. And my career has gotten to a point where I get to call more of the shots about how I want to be working, and I've got enough titles under my belt and enough work that I've done, and my novel being out, that people are willing to say, okay, guess what? Maybe we don't need to have Cameron in the office every day. I've got my professional office here at my home in Scottsdale, and then kabam! This whole quarantine work from home thing hits, and I never want to sound like a vulture or somebody who's taking advantage of a bad situation, but the simple fact is that a lot of studios are realizing that their demand for in studio personnel might not be as important as they as they thought it was, and it's funny because whereas it was a lot more of a difficult hunt for a studio that would allow me to be a director at a director level status, and doing that from hundreds of miles away. Now we were just speaking about this earlier. I've actually been turning away work because people are like, oh well, yeah, I guess if we don't care about moving him out here, it's a very different story. I'm trying to look at it as a optimistic, hey, this is a very positive, exciting step forward, I think, for a lot of people and a lot of businesses. It's also kind of heartbreaking thinking about, it's been over 10 years that I've been doing this, kind of hard back and forth between, big cities at a painfully regular rate,
Yeah. Yeah. It was funny. I was actually just doing some job hunting this morning because I am unemployed and I'm like starting to look for work again. And I was pretty surprised. I mean, this is something I've done before where I've looked for work, and there's just like, I mentioned before, if you're willing to have a little bit more of a migrant lifestyle, or your family is willing to move every 3 to 5 years, because that seems to be how long it takes for like a studio to have layoffs, then you can have a career because you can move around to these different studios. But I'm not in a place where I can do that. But it was kind of cool looking today, seeing a lot of postings where people are like, yeah, we're okay with remote. We're okay with remote. We're okay with remote.
Because you have to, and what's the saying, that necessity is the mother of invention. In this case, I think it was necessity was the lifting a little bit of the veil off the eyes. I when I'm in the studio, it's great being able to turn around, just literally roll my chair around and say, hey, design lead, we've got this happening on the narrative, or hey, sound crew, can we bring this in? That's super handy. It's maybe 3 seconds difference between me clicking on that person in Skype or Zoom or Google Chats and setting that up. And the advantages of me being able to turn that conversation off and then get to work entirely uninterrupted are tremendous. I think my own productivity has actually increased. I've never been a fan of the open office format. It seems like it's the direction most studios are in nowadays. Most game studios are in nowadays because, let's be honest, it's just cheaper when you don't have to have walls up. But as for a lot of creative stuff, especially the writing stuff, you really have to be isolated, not just headphones isolated, but really feel like you're in a place where you can dig in and explore ideas without, people walking by and bumping your chair, looking over your shoulder and making comments,
Yeah. Yeah. Solitary is just as important to creativity as that teamwork. So this is one thing that I'm very I have very mixed feelings about, because I've personally like have an interest in the benefits of people being together, face to face. And that's kind of a little bit of a, I don't know if would you call that an article of faith I have about like what makes people work better together. But I do also see the benefits of being like remote work and obviously the isolation. And so this will be an interesting test case to see, like, once studios have the option, like what will they prefer? Like what will they will this actually have proven to be better in some ways, in some cases?
And it's funny, Brandon, what you're talking about are these two ideas that seem so to contradict each other. I think I've just been working out a magic system with this fantasy game I'm working on, and it started out with the very cliche, well, it's light versus dark and good versus bad, and there's this binary idea, and I've been pushing to move away from that and towards more of a nuanced case of balance. And it's funny, like we literally had a creative meeting about that this morning, where it's not just purge all the darkness from the land, but help that land to find a balance between nature and industry and peace and quiet and day and night. And I can't help but see a tie between what we're talking about here is well, yes, I love having that solitary time to kind of follow the muse in some directions. There is the definite power to the communal brainstorm and to having a jam session with everybody there. And I don't think it has to be one way or the other. I think really it's finding that balance, and I think with any of these, these studios that I'm working for right now, once the the red plague has passed and we're ready to open the doors here, I'll of course be doing trips out there. And we'll definitely be doing creative jam sessions and filling, marker boards with ideas. But I love that is tempered with the fact that, or the idea that, and then I'll be able to come home and in my office construct out of that beautiful kind of creative, chaotic swirl. I'll be able to find some powerful stories and some great stuff. But that's the stuff that I really feel needs to be kind of sharpened in solitude.
Yeah. Have you ever read Cal Newport's Deep Work? Is it called Deep Work? Deep Work. I would highly recommend that, especially considering like what we're talking about right now. I mean, it is kind of a nice counterpoint to the culture of like, brainstorming makes everything better. Interconnectedness. We need more interconnectedness. And his concept is very much focused on this idea of the best type of work requires large blocks of time to really think hard about certain problems in an uninterrupted space, which, I've experimented a bunch with, and like, I totally believe it. Like as an artist, it's a pretty common thing for me to experience that I have to be working at least for an hour before I really start producing good stuff.
Yes.
Yes.
And having constant interruptions and constant, and it's a tricky thing as a director. I've got half a dozen different teams that want input, and a lot of times they want input because they just don't want to make a decision, and so one of my biggest responsibilities, I feel, is arming my team so that they can make their own decisions. But regardless, it used to be a case of okay, what are the few meetings I've got to work around, and now it's like, wow, my day is full of meetings. Where am I going to scrounge up an hour so I can actually get some good creative work done? Because I believe there's a difference between being a good director that can just point people in the right direction and a good director that is can make sure the people are aligned, but is co-creating with them and helping to develop something in sync with them. They're two sides of the job that I think there's a spectrum of directors can excel in one side or the other. But I sure love to find a balance. Again, maybe that's going to be the theme of this discussion: finding a balance between those two.
Well, I think it's interesting. From what you say, it kind of sounds like the necessary meetings kind of come first, and then you fill in your solitary work around that. I wonder if it might be an option to negotiate for something where you say, hey, this is my kind of block of creative time, and try to fill in around that. I mean, there's
lots of ways to do that.
Yeah, that's spot on, actually, Brandon. With it was something with one of these studios that I decided to make make turn into law is it's a no meeting Wednesday. And so Wednesday
awesome.
is kind of the day, and it's something that it's across the board, because I don't think it's just a problem for the, quote unquote creative side of development. I think for creative problem solving and engineering, in UI UX, in any of the slants of design, there's a power to having that uninterrupted time. And while it's no official meetings, people are still chatting. They've still got the Google Hangouts open and everything else, but there's just nothing official, and you're allowed to say, whether it's on Slack or River, that you can actually tag your name with I'm reading stuff right now, I'm focusing right now, don't bug, and
nice.
and it's a sacrosanct time. It's been good. We're just a few weeks into trying this out, but it's been a great way of kind of putting a little bit of a muffle on the incredibly powerful but often very noisy computer communication window we've got right here.
It really demands a lot of attention.
Oh yeah, it can.
For me, I've had to. It can be so addictive for me that I know that probably among the family I kind of am a little bit sparse in my usage of those things, but I think that's probably because other people just are able to do it more responsibly than I do. I've just been so completely useless in trying to control my kind of compulsions when it comes to like social media that my general way of doing things is I have like apps and things that will actively block the internet or social media. But the way I kind of organize my day that I've kind of figured out, this is kind of the general thing, and of course I have to adapt this quite a bit, is it's usually just the mornings I block out for work. That's usually when I do my best work, and just after lunch in the afternoon is usually less productive. So that's usually like when I like to do meetings, because you got that interaction and that energizes you a little bit. And
it's so funny, Brandon, because and this is where it really becomes, I don't know how much is nature or nurture here, but for me, mornings are always the time I would rather have meetings. Mornings are always my I'm like, that's where all I need is my
that's genetic for sure, because we grew up in the same household, but we definitely have different times of day where we're more energized. Yeah,
for sure. Like most of my novel, I would say probably 80% of my novel was written after midnight. It's really later in the day, towards the evening and night, that my creative fires light, and which has been nice and a curse. It's nice in that I can do meetings all day and handle the dry stuff until I'm ready to crack my knuckles and sit down and start writing stories. The negative is that means if I'm busy all day and then writing all night, there's not a whole lot of time for sleep or rest or meditation or any of that stuff.
Any of that other stuff. Yeah, I know that grind. So what would you say if you were to say like your windows, if you're actually to set some hours, what's your prime like creative time if you really wanted like to make your best work?
So with this studio, it's a no meeting Wednesday, but my time that I've blocked off for me to do creative work is the afternoon, and so if we're looking at work hours, for me, there's it's not even just right after lunch. Like there's something about getting back from lunch and okay, let's tie off the last few ends. So usually I start like 2:00. And moving forward within the work hours. If we're talking just the hours of the day, it's funny, and maybe it's because I've got 3 kids that were pretty close in age, and I really knew I couldn't get anything done until they were in bed. It's really not until the late hours, like 9, 10, 11, 12, that the real fire starts sparking.
That's when you like to sit down and start working on
and there's all sorts of possibilities why this could be. I try to give the responsible fatherhood reason, but it's also entirely possible that that's the time when I know I'm probably not missing out on anything. There's not no friends to be talking to, no shows going on or anything. That's when the world has gone quiet.
I'm just curious, do you ever have the experience, because it's kind of in the middle of night, where you're kind of like in this like liminal hypnagogic state where you're like half asleep and working within that realm, or are you pretty alert most of the time?
I just don't. I'm more really just biologically just more of a night owl. Like I just don't get that sleepy at night. And if I've got an idea that I'm chasing and it's exciting me, there have been many nights that I've written until I notice the window outside is light again. Yeah, and that's just like that. That's where the idea just kind of takes its own life. Have I had kind of that waking dream thing where I can move through that? I have. It's rare, and for me, it's often in the late mornings on a Saturday where I've actually got some time to sleep in, and that's kind of fun to sort of pursue ideas like that. But it tends to be more of my wouldn't that be a fun story to write, and less focused on what stories I have to write for work.
Yeah.
So are you actively doing some work on your off hours on the Etherwalker sequel? Well, and there's going to be a revision to the
the first book, right?
Yes, and so the publisher has locked me in for the sequel coming out next year, and thought it would be fun to do kind of a director's cut of Etherwalker. And there had been some when the first draft came out. There were some chapters that, due to some time limitations, we were aiming towards Comic-Con. We weren't able to get fully polished to a state that we thought was good enough. And so those chapters, I now have a chance to go back and polish them and get those back in. So yeah, the next year we're going to be seeing the sequel to Etherwalker and a kind of a director's cut, author's version of that.
Yeah, I gotta say, I was really excited when I heard that you were gonna like go back and do kind of this director's cut, because I absolutely love Etherwalker. It's so much you, but it's such an energetic, dynamic book. But there is a sense that in the middle of it, there's kind of this hole where it feels like there's this drama building. And it's like, I want to see how this drama resolves. And it kind of just flash forwards past it. And I'm just like, oh, that
really needs to be in there.
Oh, yeah. And Brandon, I can't tell you, well, I'm sure you get how painful it was to say, like, hey, something's got to go. Like, there's nothing more painful than editing like that. Something's got to go. This one, while important, isn't the most important. And we can squeak by without it. But every time I go back and reread it, it becomes more painful for me that it's gone. So I'm super excited about getting this through. And luckily, I've got a great publisher that's completely up for that. We're going to do some, and coming from my artistic side, I'm excited about. We're going to do a redesign of the cover. We're going to build out a design that's going to be, lean towards the trilogy. That's coming in very much, and obviously the first part of that. And so having that come out, and then the second book is going to lead towards, and I think my publisher is hoping is going to give me more momentum towards finishing the third book, probably in the coming year after that.
Cool. And we're still going to see it. Is it a spoiler to say that are we still going to see motorcycle centaurs at some point?
Oh, the Centec will be in, and they're going to be a vital part of the story, of course.
One of the other things I think I should just explain that's really exciting about Etherwalker is this is literally like an idea that you have been like working on since I was literally like in high school. And so when you were first talking about it, I have art from when I was 17, literally, like drawings of these characters from when I was 17. And so it's like, oh, here's this thing, Cameron's doing. And then it was fun a few years back. I went back and like did a bunch of art for some of the characters. So,
Brandon, your creative input has been a big part of what happened with Etherwalker. I remember you and I both sitting in the house up in Canyon Cove in Salt Lake City, and both of us just filling sketch pages about some of these characters and some of these ideas. It's more than just, oh, this is a fun thing that we talked about. We really dug in, and I think your input was decisive for a lot of the characters and how they ended up looking.
Yeah, well, it was a lot of fun. It was kind of the beginning, of something. So
one of the fun things has been my 15-year-old son Owen has just read Etherwalker and finished it, and we were talking about it just this last Sunday. And he's like, Dad, I want to draw these characters. I like when I heard about this, and I said, well, and I'd shown him your stuff. I said, you saw Uncle Brandon's sketches, and he immediately got defensive. He was like, yeah, but I think Uncle Brandon made Rictus a little too mean looking, and I think that this and he and I was just beaming, because there's nothing better than somebody having such a realized image of your fictitious character in their mind that they take umbrage to somebody else's depiction of that. By the way, an expert depiction, Brandon.
Thank you.
And it so inspired Owen that who is generally not as much of an artist, to sit down and make some drawings so that he could express how he saw these characters. That was so much fun for me.
That's very cool. That's very exciting. Yeah, it's been fun with Lucy. Lucy's been getting very interested in drawing and storytelling. She's been doing some writing, and it's been really fun kind of seeing when you see your kids get into that stuff. But also this idea that, like, well, if they're interested in that, they're probably going to have a little bit better chance than we did, because we've learned some things.
And that's one of the fun things too, is realizing, your kids being into literature and to stories and doesn't necessarily mean they're into the same kind that you are. Like my daughters, Olivia and Morgan, are voracious readers. Like, they go through probably a new book every 2 weeks when they're out here with me. And however, their focus is on romance novels. And that's a genre that I'm very unfamiliar with. And I'm like, oh, you know what? I've always kind of seen myself as a well-read and kind of diverse reader of different types, and my understanding of romance is so, I've got the Jane Austen novels, and that's about it on my, and I don't even know, how much into the genre you would say my expertise goes. So I've decided, well, I got to dive in now. I've got to understand and talk about that with them. And it's fascinating how for them it is such a personal fascination. And it reminds me of my own fascination with science fiction and fantasy, where it was something where, I'd love to talk about it with somebody else, but deep down I knew nobody would really get it like I do,
Yeah. So have you done that yet? Have you read any of the books that they're reading?
I actually went out and got a whole set of romance novels based on my daughter's recommendations, and so I'm going through and really, regardless of genre, it's funny that you have to be reminded of this again and again. It just comes down into how good is the story, how well is it written, how
exactly.
And genre is such a light classification beyond the more important standard of is it a good story,
Yeah, and if you can kind of see at the core the thing that all good stories have in common, then you can kind of not get so caught up just in genre. I mean, any good story, there's going to be something about character that's compelling,
Well, and it's nice to be a stage in your life too, where I'm 45 years old. I can walk around with a romance novel with a guy with his shirt ripped off, and guess what? I'm cool with it. I'm 100% okay in my masculinity because now I'm doing this because I want to be able to have something to talk about with my daughters,
Yeah, it's nice to have a good inroad, some sort of commonality. Yeah, Lucy had a series that she really wanted me to read, and I read about 5 books into it, and I'm just kind of on this, the 6th book has been sitting on my night table for the last year, and she's just like, Dad, when are you gonna read Winter? When are you gonna read Winter? And I'm like, I'll get to it. I'll get to it eventually. But she's doing so much reading as well that she's just bursting to be able to share it. But she's reading so much stuff that I just I can't keep up if I want to try to share stuff with her. So it's kind of impossible. One of the things I was going to mention, just as kind of a little, I guess, pitch for Etherwalker. One of the things I really like about Etherwalker, but this is also kind of demonstrative of what makes books good in general, or interesting in general, is I love that Etherwalker uses the medium of writing in ways that only writing, to do things that only writing can do. I always love when books do that, where it's just okay, this is something, there's a lot of things within Etherwalker. It's very fantastic. There's a lot of cool visuals and things in there, but some of the really interesting conceptual stuff is stuff that would be very difficult or clunky or flashy to try to show it or communicate it. The way that he kind of senses circuits and things like that. that you can explain it conceptually as something that he feels. And I love when books can do that, when they can describe something that would be almost impossible to do in another medium. And that's one thing that Etherwalker does well,
Brandon,
too.
I really appreciate you saying that. That means a lot to me. So much of my work, my work in games has been focused on transmedia, and telling and extending the story of the game into comics and short stories and just other forms of social media. And I certainly had a nod in Etherwalker towards doing that. There's some scenes that are more cinematic, and I wanted to make sure that I was telling a story that could be told in these other ways. But yeah, I took some care to make sure like the book will always have its own place, because only books can do this. Only books can share the opening the chapters with excerpts from the Maya Quiche Genesis and having musical lyrics woven into those openings, and having the characters' thoughts and perceptions and philosophies kind of influence their perspectives and the way they think to themselves and the way they act. And so you have no idea how much that means to me that you caught that and you appreciated that, man.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, are you? I know that. I mean, this is kind of a cliche thing to ask in an interview about a book or something, but are there other things that you're kind of like thinking about, like that you want to write after Etherwalker? Do you have some plans for other things, or do you have like, are you kind of like me? Do you kind of like have like a portfolio of ideas that you're just kind of like, I wish I could get to these someday?
Yeah, I do. In fact, I've got a notebook that I just keep, that it's basically all of what I think are the best ideas I've ever had, and they've got notes in the margins and all these other things curled up, and some of them I think would make better screenplays, some better short stories, some in novels. I would actually like to step into doing some more screenplay stuff. I did
cool.
I did Unicorn City with Brian Loeffler and Adrian Loeffler, and I've had several chances to do screenplays, obviously for like the Call of Duty cinematics and some of those other kind of fun game sides of that. But I'd love to look at doing a serialized animation. I think it's no surprise right now that the series like Rick and Morty and Dan Harmon stuff with Community had done so many cool adventurous forays into storytelling and not even just breaking the fourth wall, but making jokes about breaking the fourth wall, being a cliche. And there's just some really interesting spaces I'd love to look into exploring.
Yeah, they take that about as meta as it's possible to go meta.
Well, as meta as we think it is, until then the next season, it's going to be a case of, well, yeah, that stuff, we got tired of that. And so, I think it's interesting and refreshing to say, yeah, I'm a writer and I'm writing about this thing. This is how I feel about writing about this thing. And to have an audience that is, sophisticated enough to get that and to be, entertained by that, and to, share some of the disdain for the arrogance that comes from writing like that too,
Yeah. It's very, very skillfully done. I mean, it's unfortunate that I can't really watch it with my kids right now, but it's for all of its kind of, there's definitely some nihilism within Rick and Morty, it can get pretty dark, and I'm not a huge fan of that, but it's so well done. I mean, it's not, every episode's not perfect, but there's some excellent episodes.
Yeah.
In there,
and just the concept of a cartoon where at least one of the characters knows he's in a cartoon. It allows to play with some ideas that that we really haven't seen before. We've seen the character. I mean, clear back in Shakespeare times, there's always the character that talks to the aside and talks to the audience, but it's done as a very subtle kind of wink, nod to the audience from the writer. And in this case, there's no winking and nodding done here. It's flashing the audience in a trench coat and saying, "Here I am, baby."
Did you now? I mentioned the other day that my kids have started getting into Space Invader Zim. I don't know. Did you ever watch very much Space Invader Zim back in the day?
Yes. In fact, Jonan Vasquez did some work for us at Blizzard. And in fact, I know Jonan. He's a good pal of mine. Yeah. And getting his story was do you know much about Jonan and how he got into the Invader Zim franchise?
Now, from what I understand, was he kind of approached? He had like kind of an off the wall comic, like the Johnny the Homicidal Maniac comic. And did someone approach him and say like, "Hey, do you want to pitch a series?"
And it was the sort of thing where like he literally had this comic he'd stapled together and walked around Sunset Boulevard handing this thing out, and it just became, the attitude and the smarminess, the smart ass stuff was so good that later it turned into this massive Nickelodeon franchise that and I won't get into too many of the legalities about it, but he ended up hating that Nickelodeon was kind of driving the boat there, and he didn't get a 1 red cent from the Hot Topic sales that they made, and so he kind of has been back and forth with that, and I think has kind of reset his relationship there, but no, he's just a fun guy. He's a huge gamer. That's how we were talking with him about doing some work at Blizzard, he's just kind of one of those characters who his voice through a comic kind of becomes the voice of a certain part of our own generation.
Sure. Well, I think I actually heard this from when I actually told Cole that I was our friend Cole Glass that my kids started watching, and he's like a huge Space Invader Zim fan. And he kind of made the comment that like, oh, it's kind of like a proto Rick and Morty, it's like a predecessor in a lot of ways to like Rick and Morty. And it was funny we watched, have you seen like the Invader Zim movie? There's like a movie on Netflix you can watch. And I really had not seen very much Space Invader Zim, but there's a lot of similar, it doesn't get as dark. There's a lot of similar stuff going on, just kind of this way of looking at science that it's kind of like, okay, science is very, very powerful, but also there's something kind of funny about it, like the way his dad is just like all about science, and his dad is a superhero, but his dad's also kind of totally blind to these realities that don't fit it within his paradigm, and obviously in Rick and Morty, how Rick is basically omnipotent. He's this omnipotent science god, but he's a total like incompetent, life.
He's
right?
a morally empty character. His armor is the unabashed plot armor. Like his superpower is the writers are always going to say, because when you're the guy who's smarter than everybody else, you can always say, well, no, I knew that was coming and I planned for that and I built these, this gadget or that, solution to this long before things began. And they literally make that joke in the I don't know if you saw the episode where it was all about, it was basically ripping on heist films and how it always seems like the perfect heist, and then this one thing backfires, but they actually knew it was going to backfire and they had planned for that ahead of time. And in the crappy heist movies, they never give you a clue about that. Like you never even see it coming, and it's just because writers can be like dishonest and go back and say, well, we didn't say this couldn't have happened. So I think Dan Harmon himself just has a big issue with those sort of things. So he writes a movie about that where it ends up with Rick and this like hyper intelligent computer he created to foil heists, foiling each other, saying, yeah, but I knew you were going to do that, so I did this. Yeah, but I knew, and which is essentially what a lot of these movies turn into. And again, the meta comment here is, when writers tell stories, they can kind of play with science and facts and everything else, because the one thing that's completely at their fingertips is time and the scale of how that happened and what order it happened in.
Yeah, you can always go back and kind of revise the facts and make it kind of fit exactly how you want it to.
One of the most difficult short stories I ever wrote, and it's a silly story. It was one of the Leaders of the Horde Alliance stories I wrote for Blizzard, and they gave me the option of doing, like, I could have written for like Thrall, the leader of the orcs, or King Varian from the humans, these massive heroic characters, and I decided to do Gelben Mekkatork. He's the leader of the gnomes, because I was like, what, in this massive world of like huge characters with giant shoulder pads, the gnomes exist solely by their intellect, and really, and this would have been like 2008, 2009, maybe, long before the Rick and Morty thing, but definitely in the same time that there had been all sorts of heist movies. And I realized the power of writing an intellectual character, and a character who's smart and surprises you with these insights. As an author, you have a cheat code. And that means I got to think about what this guy did, what Gelben Mekkatork did for weeks on end. And I planned it, and I got to write it out. And so there's this, this scene where Gelben is trapped in his office by his arch nemesis, right? And he's surrounded. There's no way out. And there's a moment where he looks and he makes these connections between these things, and he pulls off this ridiculously sophisticated and intelligent escape that not only frees him but counters his enemy, and he comes out as the hero. And while that was kind of the realization for me, is like, all it takes to write an intellectual character is time. You just have to have the time.
You get to sit there for hours
because I can labor on that. And now here's the funny thing, Brandon. Not that we had planned to bring this back around to a theme, but a lot of this comes back to, this is the sort of stuff you write and you put together in those moments of solitude. This is the sort of thing that absolutely requires that kind of silence and focus time, because there's no way you can chase all of that down in the middle of the of a crowd.
Yeah, this gets to, I think, something that it's important, I think, for people that want to make art is, we talked about kind of the idea generation process, and I think it's pretty similar for me. I think 90% of the ideas that really excite me are generated while I'm sleeping in, like literally, like I'm not kidding. I'm sleeping in and I have some sort of like some visuals, and I'm just like, wow, that's amazing. And there's a feeling to it that I'm like, there's really something there.
So we kind of share that. That's nice to know that there's a common thread.
But it's a very chaotic process, and it doesn't follow a plan. And so it's not like I can sleep in and I'm going to get ideas that are going to fit in with something that I'm already working on. It's like, it's going to give me something totally new that's unrelated, that's just going to distract me from what I'm trying to do. And I get, too many of those. But there's this other part of the equation where it's like, okay, I have this shell, I have this image, and I have to sit down and figure out how to like make this, do the hard work of figuring out what's the clever thing that, what's his name, Gelben Mekkatork has to do.
And the but the reward for doing that, because if you've got an audience that's willing to, kind of subsume their critical thought and really believe that Gelben did all these things, there's a lot of adrenaline that comes from the response to that. This ended up being one of the most popular of our short story series. Turns out the gnome players in World of Warcraft are a severely underserved demographic. And
like the gnomes.
Yeah, exactly. No, there's all sorts of interesting parallels there, and a lot of them actually followed me from that story and have become fans of Etherwalker and everything else. Which I don't know if you noticed, there's a little bit of an Easter egg wink and a nod towards that group even in the book. But
I would have had to been paying attention to gnome stuff, I think, to really catch that.
Well, that's good. That means it was a good Easter egg, right? But it's seeing that reaction to the dozens of long hours of painstaking work that came to putting that together is the thing that kind of like drives me to do it again, to go to submit myself to the pain again and go in because oh, that's fun. It's that same feeling of when we were little kids, Brandon and I would put on a puppet show, and Mom had made us all these interesting sock puppets. We had a great collection of those, and if I could pull off a joke between the horse and the dragon, and I could hear you guys laughing on the other side, that was it, right? Like, I wouldn't be surprised if those little formative experiences that we had didn't build some of the, lay some of the foundation blocks for why we do what we do as so-called grown-ups.
Oh, absolutely. You get that feedback. You do it's like the stuff you do where you get positive feedback where you're like, I'm going to do that again.
Yeah. Well, and the interesting thing is it's not the kind of positive feedback. It's not a pat on the back or a good job. It's more subtle. It's the something I did brought laughter. Like, my brothers are laughing because of this, there's something so genuine about that. In times when maybe I am losing hope in my own, good self or humanity in general. Just remembering that some people, start entire professions just to make people laugh, just to bring about happiness. That's kind of inspiring,
Yeah, one of the things, the really fun memories I have from childhood that's pretty emblematic of this. This is like a pretty common thing that you did when we were growing up. You would have some sort of like that you had concocted, and you were basically like, to be in my room all day, but when I'm done, I'm gonna have this thing that you guys can come check out. And you charged money for it always, or something. Right. Somehow we had to pay for it, but it's always like you had pet rocks, but you also made in your room like a pet rock amusement park with all sorts of different things that pet rocks could do. Or it was like paper transformers. You made a bunch of paper transformers.
Paper bots. Paper bots.
Paper bots. Or, it was like a role-playing game that you made. But it was what's funny to me about this is it wasn't this. You were always very intentional about it, because it was always like this announcement. Hey, guys, here's this thing I'm doing. I'm going to be in my room all day. And you did it. It wasn't just this, like, it wasn't vaporware. It's like you'd open up the door and it was like, oh, here's this pet rock amusement park. We just kind of took
that was, and that really is kind of an echo of, there was the communal part that I wanted to appreciate. Because here's the thing, I'm trying to remember the details of like Pet Rocktopia or whatever it was. But I remember that, like, the bunk bed, there was a string from the top of it going down, and there was a little gondola thing, and there were roller coasters for the rocks, and there was a beach. The fun thing was building and creating, of course. But I remember once you guys were in, it was playing with you. Being a part of the adventure that we were having there. And I have to laugh about the always charge, because it's not like we got like any sort of an allowance or anything that made that useful at all. It probably broke down into just a barter system at some point, but that's
no, but I mean, it was always, I'm interested now. This is something that I just haven't thought about in, decades, but, from our point of view, it was always just like, oh, we're waiting for the door to open, and I never thought about it from your point of view of, how much you're like, oh, here's this thing I'm going to do. And then that you actually sat down and did it, that there wasn't ever just like, yeah, I'm not going to do this, And
it's funny, because like looking at that now, Brandon, and then, my career that I'm in right now, it seems like, oh, well, that seems like the obvious step. But there were a good 15 years in between those two where I was convinced I was going to be a doctor and wanted to go to med school, and it's kind of just a doy sort of a situation, huh?
So I should explain that in the interim of trying to get us scheduled, I also did one of these with Damien. So which I think what I'm eventually going to do is do like all the brothers, which I think will be interesting in its own way, just because each of the brothers is kind of like had a unique path. Each of them has kind of, Adrian is an entrepreneur, but I think that's very closely tied to art. And the rest of us have done things, or our lives are very much revolve around things that are explicitly artistic.
Yeah. But the creativity of what Adrian does is no less,
absolutely
creative on that.
I mean, it's just, they're within the same family. But what I was just going to say that part of talking with Damien was his story about, I was going to be a doctor, and then, than this. It was, and I think for him, it was a little bit more of a drawn out process, the way he described it, of kind of making that decision where he wanted to go and kind of figuring out where he wanted to be. But it's something I forget. I forget that you wanted to be a doctor, but I mean, if I remember correctly, your decision to change paths happened a little bit more quickly, right?
It did. It was, I know I tend to be dubious of these ideas of these stories where there's just this one moment of revelation that people change their entire lives on. But the simple fact is, I kind of had one. I was at college. I had done my 3 years of pre-med training, done my chem, my OChem, my physics. I had, was majoring in zoology, and was gearing up for the MCAT. And it was a case of several momentous things kind of happening all at once. One of the big ones was the Toy Story film came out, and I don't think people remember how just entirely transformative that film was to the industry when we realized you could use computers to make films that told stories that were just as poignant and powerful as a live action film. And that coincided with BYU getting this donation of high-end animation software and hardware. At the time, you needed to have these high-end computers to run it. And I was kind of at the epicenter of that happening, and was even implemental in getting that major going with some of the core students. In fact, it was my buddy Donald Mustard and I were the two first graduates from the BYU's animation program, and he's gone on to be creative director over at Epic Games.
Sorry, I mean, technically at that time, wasn't it like an outgrowth of the engineering department? That it was.
Yeah, they were trying to decide where to put it. Because they were looking at, should this come out through the BFA illustration program? And the program just didn't have the kind of budget that would allow them to stay on top of the hardware and the software. So they moved it over to engineering for a while, and in the end, they were able to turn it into such an important and even profitable program that they were able to wrest it back under the in the design department. But now, the BYU animation department is a major feed into Pixar.
It's like one of the top animation studios in the world.
It is,
or top animation schools in the world. Yeah. So it's like CalArts West. It would have been my dream school when I wanted to go to BYU. Like for me, when I was planning on going to school, it was like I really wanted to do animation at that time when I was looking at schools, and so it was like CalArts or BYU, and maybe it was out of a little bit of cowardice, but also kind of just traditional, thoughts, wanting to, being Mormon and wanting to go to BYU. I ended up going to BYU, and they had no animation department at the time, so I ended up studying film and just had my weird path because of that. But yeah. Now
I'm sure you have no regrets about pursuing film. I mean, you made some really cool pieces of art right there, and some great connections as well. So,
no, yeah, I love the path that brought me to where I am. I'm very happy with. So, I guess to finish up, I'm kind of interested in just, definitely now that you're back in Arizona, you seem very, very settled. Like there is a stark difference just in anytime I spend time with you, obviously being at your house, that there just feels something different. Like just kind of that feeling of like, of having some sort of like grounding, and it's a palpable difference. It really goes to show you that, places aren't interchangeable. We're not just these interchangeable little modular pieces. Like human beings really, really benefit from having places like homes and having things like families and stuff like that. So I'm interested in how kind of you're feeling now working within that setting where you have kind of some ground underneath your feet.
Yeah. And it's funny. I think, full well that I tend to be a ridiculous optimist about things, and I remember, after my divorce happened, and my ex moved to Arizona, and I was like, okay, I can make this work. I can have both. I can do my career, and I can be a father, and figure this both out. And the only negative is I'm just going to be traveling a lot. I'm going to be, when I was working for Blizzard out in Orange County, it was that 6-hour drive back and forth between, Orange County and Mesa, Arizona, that I did twice a month. Later, as work picked up and I was able to afford it as a flight, doing that. I got better and better at doing this really tortuous thing. Um, and I think after some point I kind of just assumed, well, that's my life. I'm always going to have this, kind of jarring, painful thing because, the problem is if you've got a home, like I bought my home in Scottsdale, but you're not living there most of the time. It's very hard to take care of it. It's very hard to work on upkeep. It's very hard and it's very hard to turn it into a home as far as, having, pictures on the wall and all those other things. It was all I could do just for the bare minimum of making sure that the plumbing was working and the yard wasn't overgrown with weeds. A lot of people on their weekends, they go home and you get to rest. I'm done. Okay, it's been a hard week, so now I just get to veg on the couch and maybe I'll mow the lawn or something. For me, I would get done with a long, hard weekend and I'd have to jump on a flight to go across state lines. I get into this new place. I immediately was on the ground and would probably have to get an Uber because I didn't have a car here to go get groceries for the kids. And I try to plan things so I had just enough time to do that right when the kids would arrive. And now I have 3 kids that show up and they're, I haven't seen them for, a week and a half. And so we got to catch up. And it was just the weekend would end and the kids would finally go home. And now I had to fly back over. And there wasn't a whole lot of chance for peace and rest. And Brandon, I think what you're, I'm getting the long way around to what you're saying. I think what you're sensing in me is I'm somebody who's finally got some time to take a moment and rest, to take a moment and breathe. And to do that in a home, I had tears in my eyes. Just this past year alone is when I finally was able to start putting up pictures on the wall. And up until now, my living, moving family album has been Instagram. Where I take pictures of the kids because that's the sort of thing I can have pictures of them with me while I'm so far away. And so I found a place where I could print out some of my favorite pictures from Instagram, and I just covered the entire wall of one of my houses with those pictures. Little by little. Turning this place that has been kind of an oasis and a stopover into something that's more of a home. And the kids, their rooms we're redesigning their rooms and getting to do all those things. And there is something, Brandon, I think very deep in our DNA about having that safe place, about having that place of peace. And it was the thing that for me, I sacrificed to be able to have both a job and to be a father, until I finally got to a point in my career where I realized I didn't have to make that sacrifice anymore. I can finally command work from where I am, and again, it's something that it's nice to see for whatever reasons the world shifting to embrace that perspective as well. I would certainly hope that. For any other individuals in my situation with family or kids in another place than their work is, I hope this is going to open up opportunities for them to be more grounded, for them to have a safe place that they can call home and still pursue their job, their career, like they would like to. So that's the the probably longer than you'd hope for answer to what you're saying.
There's all sorts of things that I didn't really realize until you started talking about it. I have this general sense of you feeling kind of more settled, but I kind of get the sense that this is the first time in a long time you've had the space to really work on your own well-being, to stop and think about getting some rest. but it's interesting. One of the meditations that's pretty common. I don't know if you're familiar with the term metta meditation. They call it loving kindness meditation. This is basically meditations where you practice loving yourself or loving other people, and so you do phrases where you'll wish well-being for yourself or for others. But the particular way that I do it is based on kind of a hierarchy. It's almost like you're doing Maslow's hierarchy of needs within the loving kindness. And so you say something like, may you be safe, may you be healthy, may you be happy, may you have peace, may you be free. And so it basically starts with safety, and then it kind of adds these things, these kind of higher levels of well-being on top of it. But it's interesting. You said safety, and it's like starts with safety. Like that, the well-being starts with that feeling of safety and feeling grounded, and then being able to to kind of build on top of that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And Brandon, I think that's really it. And I didn't think, with the way that in our culture that we're raised, while we put value on family, we put value on good work. I don't think we do a lot of dissection of what we need to have peace and joy beyond those things. And I think for the longest time, I was like, well, okay, I've got the major ones here. I've got a great job, and I've got happy, healthy, amazing, beautiful kids. I get to be in their lives, maybe not as much as I like, but I get to be there, and I get this job. But why am I just being drained? And while I had these moments of happiness, I didn't have a lot of moments of peace over that past 10 years. And I believe peace is something that we can hunger for. We can be starving for that.
Oh, absolutely.
And I'm in a state in life right now where I have an abundance of peace. And and simple things like I got a dog finally. Because I'm not traveling all over the world, I can have a dog and I can take the dog for walks. And so much of our family roots are in people that were caretakers of the land, ranchers and farmers, and even in my own desert backyard here in Scottsdale, being able to go back and put up a fence, and being able to dig a garden. There's something just very peaceful and grounded in that was never answered in all my time of Batman and Robin racing between two different lifestyles.
So I'm kind of curious with kind of the space that's opened up. Has it, we had a chat about this earlier, and we both grew up Mormon. We were talking a little bit about like watching General Conference as kids, which is basically where you sit for like 2 sessions of 2 hours and listen to like old men give sermons, and it's basically just watching a face on a black background giving a sermon. And that's what we're raised doing, which is it's great pre-training if you want to get into meditation. But you kind of mentioned that you had actually spent some time watching conference recently, and so I was kind of curious with this kind of space that's opened up. Are you thinking very much about like spiritual things? What are you thinking about it? Where are you at as far as those things?
Yeah, I think there was there's the philosophical differences we might have with our faith, with our religion, but beyond that, there's also the fact that these often very peaceful moments were woven into our childhood, and I realized that the Mormon General Conference is done twice a year, and having something where I'm like, oh, it's conference time, and you put that on and you hear the sound of the organ and the Mormon Tabernacle Choir and the voices of these men who are sharing messages of peace and hope, love and forgiveness, and sure, maybe some of the details might be things that we take issue with, but on the whole, these are things that for reasons both intellectual and soulful are peaceful for me, and and I've had my kids with me on some of those weekends where we'll sit and probably do a little more active listening and talking about what's being shared, but even just having that on in the background while I'm doing something entirely unrelated it's become something that I realize my specific allegiance to an organization doesn't need to have bearing on something that I sense deeply to be a delivery vehicle of peace.
Do you ever see yourself at some point wanting to go back to church, like doing church again?
Sure. How about I'm not opposed to that as a possibility. And when my kids are speaking or want me to come along, I don't have any negative feelings towards that specifically. But I also don't see a vital need for me to be daily or weekly, lining up to do that as well. It's
So you're not feeling like that salient draw right now, like, oh, that's someplace I'm feeling called to. Yeah,
exactly.
Okay.
I'm feeling I'm to borrow the term. I'm feeling mindful about it. Like I'm feeling like that is something that I wouldn't have negative inclinations towards trying when I feel like it's something I want to do. But I also don't feel like constant urge to participate in, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I guess there's this part of me, like, kind of intellectually, that's like, yeah, that's something that could happen, but it's not something I actually think is very likely to ever happen on my part. But I think it's very, very. I'm like very interested in kind of being supportive these days in whatever path people want to take. I just kind of looking at it. It's very clear that people can find some deep, like you say, deep peace and satisfaction and obviously growth in lots of different places. So more power to anyone that wants to do that.
And I feel like as we gain more years on our on the board and become more hopefully more aware of who we are. I imagine that the input, the vectors that peace can approach us is probably unique for every individual. What brings you, and that doesn't mean that the way that you're seeking peace, the way that you're seeking harmony, is bad. It might just not be the same one that I need to find that peace and harmony. But I think it's important that we respect every individual's pursuit of peace and harmony.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I'm increasingly seeing that happen. It's that's kind of fun about these discussions I've been able to have with some of the brothers, is seeing kind of each person's individual take on thing, and it's interesting so far. At least it's funny with this format. I feel like we're able to discuss things because of whatever the certain shape of this format. We're able to discuss things that we wouldn't even normally discuss, even if we're having like a heart to heart with each other, which is kind of really interesting.
It's almost because the focus is the conversation, and sometimes when we're talking, it's just the conviviality. It's just being next to each other. And Brandon, I love hearing your voice. I love hearing your victories and failures and where life is taking you, and hearing about your family and stuff. And this conversation is a little bit more of a kind of directed, focused sort of a thing.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and so I mean, I did one with Damien too, but I thought it was like so cool. It's like I've had a chance in both these conversations just to like get to know you guys in a way that there's all these different things that we talk about as far as things that matter to us that we almost say in passing, but it's been a chance for me to just pay much more careful attention to like what matters to you guys, which has been really cool, but also. It's interesting to see all the little unique ways that people look at things. Like even for our brothers that are active in the Mormon Church, they have their own little idiosyncrasies with how they think about things and what things matter to them. So
it's interesting, Brandon. I've got I'm still close with some of my friends from high school. Mike Levitt, Mark Garf, Mike Christopherson, and we've all been chatting on Marco Polo as this quarantine's taken over, just to check in on each other. And we all have varying degrees of connections to our faith. And it's interesting. I think when I was younger, I would have thought, well, no, that would have been a complete no deal in having a friend is somebody who didn't at least believe, what I believed, because that's, I think when you're younger, you assume that's so fundamental. But now having, a friend who's a lawyer, who's one who's a landscape architect, one who's a judge, and coming from such wildly different, professional standpoints and even religious standpoints, there is something that we all share, which is literally just the joy of being together, the joy of hearing each other's voices, and and I feel very lucky that I have that with my brothers as well, and so it's something that I don't think I'm lacking for. I know all I have to do is reach out and it's there, and wow, it's such an important thing for human beings to have that network, not just of family, but of people that take joy in hearing the sounds of your voice.
Yeah. Well, that is probably a really great way to wrap things up for today. A nice conclusion. But anyway, hey brother, I really appreciate this. I just want to chat with you a little bit after we stop recording, but thanks again for chatting with me today, and hopefully we can do it again.
Of course, Brandon. Great chatting with you as well.
You've been listening to How to Be an Artist. To support this podcast, you can go to patreon.com/H2BNA.